Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. What's the creepiest thing that has ever happened to you? Please remember to like, share, comment, hype, listen and ask for shoutouts, and subscribe. My dad died when I was a kid. He was an engineer and very much where the autism came from in my family. He wasn't a very warm or silly dad, but he loved us in his own way. One of the ways he showed love was by trying to teach us things. He enjoyed taking things apart and learning how they worked and thought we should too. He died in '05, long before the crazy tech we have today. But he was into computers, cameras, radios. He even worked on early facial recognition tech. When I was in early college, I got really into fandom and, being the arts and craft autism that I am, quickly got into making my own cosplays and sewing in general. I got a sewing machine for Christmas one year and had it set up in my parents' basement so I could work on things when I was home or on school break. One day, shortly after I got the sewing machine, I went downstairs to find the entire bobbin housing removed from the machine, piece by piece, with all the parts lined up on the table in front of the machine. I was pissed, because I had no idea why anyone in my family would have done this and, more importantly, had no idea how to put it back together. It took me a couple of hours, lots of cursing, and staring at the manual, but I eventually managed it. Then I went upstairs to be an angry teenager at my mom, stepdad, and sister to figure out who messed with my stuff. They all swore up and down they didn't do it, and honestly, there was no reason not to believe them. My mom wasn't into sewing at all and preferred to leave me and my weird hobbies alone. My stepdad couldn't have cared less about my sewing machine and tended to be pretty cautious about touching our stuff anyway, being the new guy. And my younger sister didn't like going in the basement, too creepy, and was too busy with video games and anime at the time anyway. Besides, what would any of them gain out of messing with my sewing machine and likely getting grease on themselves? We ultimately, collectively concluded it had to have been my dad, making sure that if I was going to use a machine, I understood how it was put together. I still know how to take it apart and fix and clean it to this day. When I was young, I used to stay at my grandparents' house in their basement guest room. That room had a mannequin in the corner, one of those faceless ones, but it was a full body, and you could pose the arms and legs. It made me very uncomfortable, but I wasn't a wuss or anything. I knew it wasn't real, so I didn't really much care. Anyway, one night during a weekend stay, I remember getting into bed and suddenly having a very bad feeling about the mannequin. I don't know why, but it just felt bad. I turned on the light and stared at it for a while, and nothing happened. Because it was a mannequin, so I turned the light off and eventually drifted off into sleep. In my sleep, I dreamed that I was awake in the bed and a dreamy reddish haze was shining into the room from the window high on the wall, making it look sort of crimson or purple. I remember being unable to move as the mannequin suddenly started moving. It moved very jittery at first, but then it started dancing around the room very gracefully. I recall being enraptured by it. It was hauntingly beautiful and uncanny, like it was telling a story. But I couldn't interpret what it meant because I was also petrified. The strange, uncanny dance concluded as the mannequin slowly and smoothly twisted and turned its body toward the side of the bed where I was sleeping. I remember it slowly perching over my bed, taking its hands and beginning to choke me. I started panicking because I felt like I actually couldn't breathe. I woke up with a start and realized I was covered by a sheet. I flung it off and lay there in total darkness for a while. That dream had really freaked me out. To get some relief, I turned on the bedside lamp. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in ghosts or demons. I'm sure there is a rational explanation for that night, but I have no idea what it was. I shit you not. I turned on that light, and right there, right next to my bed, was that mannequin, its arms posed over my bed motionless. I screamed so loud I woke up my grandparents upstairs and their neighbors. My grandmother came down at 3 a.m., terrified I was being murdered or kidnapped, but it was just me, standing in the corner of the room cowering. She saw the mannequin standing over the bed and was immediately furious, believing I was pranking her. But after I pleaded and cried enough, she finally caved a bit and threw the mannequin into a closet upstairs. I've never seen that specific mannequin since, but since that day, I have been deathly afraid of mannequins. I don't trust them and never will. Not humans, but they look human, just wrong creatures. Ugh. Pretty sure I was almost robbed, kidnapped, or both by 3 men in a van. I was clearing out my storage unit. It was a storage unit facility that had rows of outdoor units, and mine happened to be in the back corner of the end of a row. The entrance to the facility is locked by a gate that you have to enter a passcode to open, so it's not like just anyone can get in. I saw these guys in their van at a unit when I drove in and didn't think much of it as I drove past them to get mine. About an hour later, one of them walked past my unit, right between my moving van and the open door to said unit. There was only about 5 feet between the open storage unit door and where I had parked the van, so I figured he was either casing the van, the unit, or looking to see if I was by myself. There's no other reason to invade someone's space like that. He could have easily walked on the other side of the van. He kept walking, but I was on alert after that. A few minutes later, the van with all 3 men drove by, and one of them said hello to me, but I just stared them down. The entrance and exit from the storage facility were on the other side of the property from my storage unit. There wasn't any reason they would need to be driving in the back corner by my unit. These effers then made another loop around the facility and drove by again with the back sliding door open. I always carry mace with me and had this little piece I call my mace gun because instead of a regular mace canister, it literally looked like a small gun, and it shot mace when you pulled the trigger. I got this out of the cab of my moving van and was shutting the door to my storage unit when these guys drove by a 3rd time. But the driver saw the mace gun in my hand and said, "Okay, lady, we get it," and then drove off. I got into the cab of the moving van, locked the doors, and sat there for like 10 minutes, waiting to see if they were going to drive by again. I wanted the license plate number. I wanted to try and take pics of them. They never came back, and I finished moving my things out a few days later. It didn't seem real at the time. It never feels real when I tell the story, but a lone woman in an isolated area and 3 men driving by multiple times in a van, what else would it have been other than robbery or kidnapping? Hey guys, I hope everyone is doing well. I'll get back to some more shout outs tomorrow. Just want to hope that everyone had a great weekend. And I enjoyed these stories today. Not so much the paranormal aspect of it, but just how different people can perceive different stories differently. So, yeah. Otherwise, I hope things are great, and we will see you tomorrow. First of all, I'm not a believer in things I'm about to talk about, but this made my hairs raise. I think I might be a believer now because of it. So I have a young daughter, right? She's a talker. She talks a lot. Even when she was young, she couldn't say all the words and would say them incomprehensibly. But I was a sad, so we spent a lot of time together. And most of the time I understood her anyway, on top of the creeps. So I put her to bed. She's a bad sleeper, so we have this whole ritual. One of them involves looking through the window and saying goodnight to the cows you can sometimes see from that window. One evening she says goodbye to the cows. I want to put her to bed, and she says something about wanting to say goodbye to Mama too. I tell her we said goodbye to Mama. She's downstairs. She looks at me confused and points at the window. I think it's a diversion, and I put her to bed. This goes on for a couple of evenings until I decide to entertain her. I pick her up, and she points at the window and she waves goodbye to Mama. I think, okay, that's odd, but her mother was in the garden that day, and there's a language barrier, so I say to her, "Yes, Mama was in the garden today, huh? Now she's inside." She looks at me confused, and she shakes her head no and says, "Papa, no, other Mama." It creeped me out, but I acknowledge sometimes kids can say creepy things. I put her to bed, and that's it. Until she keeps crying at night, waking up yelling, etc. My wife, who's a big believer in spirits and stuff from her culture, calls a guy from her homeland to bless the room with instructions to put salt in the corners of the room, and he prays over the phone in the room, etc. At the end of the call, he tells my wife that there is a bad spirit there. It should be gone with the prayers, but there's also a spirit outside. He says it's a deceased mother who lost her child, and she just comes by, and she will not harm us or our daughter. He said this with no information of any kind. That was very, very, very creepy, man. I guess my daughter did see another mama. When I was in 3rd grade, I and my mom used to live in front of a cemetery, so it was right in our backyard. One day, I and the neighbor kid was playing outside on the swing set, and this random man from the cemetery came limping over. There was something very off about him and eerie, besides the fact that he was just in the cemetery. It was norm to see all types of people. The man was wearing ripped jeans, had dirt all over him, had extremely pale, thin hair, possibly in his 50s or 60s, and overall didn't look well. He leaned over the fence as we were getting down from the swing set. He started yelling at us, but we could not understand what he was saying, but he sounded angry. Horrified, I and the neighbor kids ran inside and saw the man behind us quickly hopping the fence. We lived in a duplex, and my mom and the kids' family were across the street, with the other moms. We didn't have phones, so we started banging on the window and yelling with the window cracked. Our parents came rushing over and asked us what was happening. One of the neighbors' dads ended up coming around and looking around for the man we mentioned, hopped in his truck and drove around. They could not find him, only the dirty, blood-like stains on the fence where he had hopped over. Our parents called the police and filed a report, but they never ended up finding him. Not sure why, but even to this day I still remember him crystal clear, and something was completely off about him. With how fast the man moved for how terrible and old he looked, it was almost ghost-like fluid movement in the worst way possible. After that, I wanted nothing to do with the cemetery. My mom and I used to go ride our bikes, clean up graves that looked like they hadn't been touched in years, and give flowers to the resting babies. I never went back or went back in the backyard. The curtain in my room was always closed. I don't know if this is creepy enough, but when I was something around 14 years old, my mom invited a man to our home, which she only knew from the internet. She didn't even invite him, more like he came to our house, but she told him the address of residence. This man was foreign and he was weird and rude. I wasn't happy about the idea that he wants to stay at our place for a couple of days. I told him with my broken English that I and my sister don't feel comfortable with that idea. He told me that I should clean up and that I'm ugly. Also, when he was being rude to me, my mom started recording the situation. She's narcissistic, she does that often. And he took the phone out of her hands and smashed it on the wall. Yeah. I was freaked out. But my mom's a really irresponsible person, so the situation wasn't so absurd. Keep in mind that I was living at the time only with my mother and sister, and I'm also female. This dude was sleeping on the kitchen floor. I think he was like 35 to 40 years old. After 2 or 3 uncomfortable days, he left. My mom was out and texted me that he wants to borrow a pot, and she asked if I can go downstairs and give him the pot. My sister was with me, and I went and handed him the pot. He made quick eye contact with me, which was really strange. Later on, my mom confirmed that he had escaped from a psychiatrist and was hiding at our place. Police got him, so it's fine. I don't know what happened later. Years passed and I was looking through my mother's Instagram and scrolling down to old photos. I clicked on the photo of me and there was one comment. It was him. He wrote something gross. I don't even know, but it was a sexual comment. It was a photo from that time. When I was 16, I came home from school and realized I'd forgotten my house key. My parents usually got home at about 30 minutes after me, and we lived in a very safe neighborhood. And so I plopped down in our front yard and took out a book to wait. An SUV I didn't recognize pulled up in front of the house, and 2 men rolled down the window and stared at me. Our yard was small, so they were only about 10 feet away. I could see they were talking while looking at me. So without moving, I asked if they needed help. They drove away, but I saw them still watching me through the side mirror. I got the vibe this was not right, but this was before the days of cell phones, probably around 2004. We lived in a heritage neighborhood with several large, densely planted yards with secret pass-throughs us kids knew about. I hopped the fence and climbed into my neighbor's yard because it was very dense and was further back from the street, but had multiple exits. I hovered in there for a minute or so, and sure enough, the same car pulled up to my front yard a second time. They idled there for about 5 minutes. I couldn't safely knock on my neighbor's door without being seen, so I waited, and then when they drove off, used another pass-through to get to another neighbor's yard. I knew this neighbor wasn't home, but it was slightly uphill, so I could actually see our entire street and the house from there. The SUV pulled up in front of my house a third time, and, when they still couldn't find me, pulled around the corner and up the adjacent hill so they could see my house, but I wouldn't have been able to see them had I been back in the front yard. I was genuinely panicking at this point because it was clear these dudes were waiting for me for whatever reason. They stayed for about 15 minutes until my parents pulled into the driveway, and then the SUV drove off. I never told them, particularly because I didn't get a license plate and wouldn't have recognized the men if I saw them again, but also because I just didn't want to think something sinister could have happened to me. It's still scary to think of what may have been, and I'm 35 now. I started hanging out with friends after school until I knew my parents were home and never walked home alone from school again, even though it was only 5 minutes down the road. This event happened back in 2004. My father passed away in the bedroom I was sleeping in at the time of this event about 7 years prior. My brother and I were up late. I was playing Halo 2 and was playing something on Nintendo DS. We heard footsteps walk by my room toward the bathroom. The door was closed because it was late and we didn't want to wake my mother up. A few minutes go by and we realized no one ever walked back from the bathroom. We assumed it was our mother the first time we heard footsteps, which, when we thought about it, was weird because she would have said something to us like, "Go to bed." I opened the door and checked the bathroom. The lights are out and no one is in there. I tell my younger brother and he's like, that's strange. Between my room and the bathroom, there's a door that goes up to the attic right next to the bathroom. My bedroom door was maybe 8 to 10 feet from the attic door. Another 5 minutes later, we hear footsteps again coming from the bathroom. I was deep into the round of Halo 2 when my brother said, "Hey, do you hear that?" I did in fact hear it. The footsteps started moving toward my bedroom door, which was closed again. This time the footsteps stopped right in front of the bedroom door, and this time we can see a shadow blocking the light in the laundry room, which was straight in front of our door about 15 feet back. My brother's face turns pale. I go to open the door and he says, "No, don't." I tell him to stop being a baby. I open the door and no one's there. At this moment, my brother's face goes pale. I tell him it being late is playing games on us, and I close the door. I don't even sit before we hear 2 bangs on the door. I jump into the bed with my brother and we grab a hold of each other. Now I'm scared as my younger brother was. We hear footsteps once more walking back toward the bathroom. My brother then says, "That's not Dad," who had been dead for 7 years at that point. When we first moved into this place, there was a dead crow found on the 3rd step of the attic steps. My aunt, being super religious, said, "That's a bad omen. You shouldn't move here." A year later, my father died of lung cancer about 10 feet away from where the crow was found. That room and that attic never felt normal. I've had family members over the years recently tell me how strange that room felt. Most of them were never in the attic. One even said she had a paranormal experience with the closet doors opening and closing and the guitar in the corner playing a chord on its own. The guitar belonged to my father. My grandmother brought it for him a few months before he passed away. I have that guitar hanging on my wall as I type this right now. If there's something to take away from this event from me, it's this. Whatever that was, it was definitely not my father. I also had sleep paralysis about 1 month while sleeping in that room, and there was always a black figure watching me when it happened. It was later on I found out that it's quite common to see a black figure while experiencing sleep paralysis.